The retaliation was global and scathing. The day he announced the tariffs months ago, before they were even in talks about being made official.
Oh! Bro, what is he doing?
We are cooked.
My homie said, shine your light on the world. Shine your light for the world to see. My homie said, shine your light on the world.
What's that common adage? Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Well, with the unabashed incompetence of the second Trump administration, the United States of America once again continues to remain ignorant to its history as they continually drive this country towards collapse with, for one, federally funded human trafficking of black and brown people, including countless children. In just 8 months, they've abducted, tortured, beaten, sexually assaulted, and trafficked over 100,000 people to countries not even of their own origin. On top of the incompetency of people like Vance, McMahon, Rubio, Hegseth, Noem, Bondi, and Trump himself, the infrastructure of the United States has been seriously weakened through openly biased hiring practices and mass firings across every sector of American society. And I've yet to even mention the Epstein cover-ups. Trump is far from the first cutthroat and competent old money businessman to hold the office of President of the United States. One particularly notable example of such an archetype is Herbert Hoover. A model of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps, rugged individualism that lays at the helm of the capitalist foundation. It was Hoover whose mockery of leadership led to the Great Depression. Of course, Hoover's incompetence was on top of many decades of openly corrupt, hyper-capitalist, white supremacist, incompetent politicians running businesses of war and racial exploitation. But his actions and his tenure saw the most direct influences in what became the Great Depression. Are similar in quite a few ways. They're both open and adamant white supremacists. And these dunce caps are far from being the only white pointy hats these two guys wear. They both utilized federal funding and state power to commit ethnic cleansing against black and brown populations. The pair are ultra-rich businessmen who are also hyper-capitalists. And also, they're both deeply unintelligent and deeply unliked. And the pair are also defined by the wide-ranging tariffs they implemented without regard for impact to the country, its industries, and international trade, its people, and most importantly, its working class populations. The leading incentive of the original Great Depression was signed into law by Hoover in the year 1930. Its name was the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, and it placed tariffs, or extra taxes on imported and exported goods and services, of around 25% on every product imported into America. And this included even more fees, an average of up to 6 to 7% increase on what are called dutiable goods, which require additional measures and fees to transport at certain quantities, such as liquor, tobacco products, food, cars, jewelry, clothing, etc. In fact, on over 20,000 of these dutiable goods, the tariff rate rose to 59.1%, and in some cases quadrupled their previous rate. Despite over 1,000 economists writing him and pleading with him to not sign, Hoover put his signature on the act and doomed America to a depression I'd argue the country has yet to recover from, even with FDR's inherently racially biased New Deal. As soon as the Tariff Act was signed, the entire world reacted furiously toward America for the unprecedented increase in the cost of national trade. In the backlash from Hawley Smoot, countless countries allied amongst themselves and instilled retaliatory tariffs against the United States. 9 nations in particular were Argentina, Australia, Canada, Cuba, France, Italy, Mexico, Spain, and Switzerland. And they all went tit for tat with the United States' immense hikes in the cost of transporting goods and services. Economics professor at Santa Clara University, Chris James Michener, reported on the retaliatory tariffs, which also coincided with international trade blocs that deliberately excluded America because of their passing of the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act. Over 35 countries protested Hoover's economic policy, and, according to Michener, U.S. exports to those nations fell between 28 to 32%, whereas U.S. imports fell by 15 to 23%. So we're seeing a reduction of 1/5 of the original output just based off the retaliation from the Tariff Act being signed. And Trump's notions of diplomacy leave much to be desired, as can be seen with the 50% tariffs placed on India and Brazil for going against Trump's wishes. The current sitting U.S. president is so erratic, so uncouth, and so disastrously clumsy and uneducated that the tariffs throughout the remainder of his second administration could be met with even greater hikes, as geopolitical conflict is only on the uptick. There's only going to be more beef he starts, there's only going to be more problems, and there's only going to be higher and higher retaliations. The retaliation was global and scathing the day he announced the tariffs months ago, before they were even in talks about being made official. Cross him or make him mad, and he'll slap your country with a 45 to 50% tariff rate like he's done with Brazil and India. Remember, Trump's original intention was to place the 25% tariff that the Hawley-Smoot Act placed on virtually all of the United States' most prominent trade partners. Much like how the stock market dropped $1 billion in value after the Hoover administration announced his intention to sign Hawley-Smoot, international uproar emanated from every continent and dozens upon dozens of countries, including America's closest and most prominent trading partners in Mexico, Canada, China, and the European Union. Ministers of finance and diplomats from Africa, Asia, Europe, and South America took tremendous offense from these blatantly spiteful, illogical, and haphazard tariffs. These countries took the highly protectionist tariffs that Trump is trying to instill as the declaration of war and as an immense slight to the world's markets and international trade networks as they currently stand. And following the global fallout and trade wars enacted by the Hawley-Smoot Act, entire industries crumbled and catapulted hundreds of millions of people into even more severe housing insecurity, unemployment, and poverty. Nations such as France, Spain, Italy, and Switzerland raised the tariffs on American cars, which essentially destroyed the American automotive industry's prosperity in those markets. Reports state that the tariff dramatically lowered U.S. exports from $7 billion in 1929 to $2.4 billion in 1932. The trade of U.S. iron and steel also saw its exports decrease by 85.5% in the wake of Hawley-Smoot's illogical upticks. These decisions deeply debilitated the U.S.'s trade relationships with the entire world. And what follows in tandem with the inclusion of tariffs is always the reality of retaliation. European retaliation raised tariffs so high that U.S. exports declined from $541 million per year to 97 million per year, which is an 82% drop. And with how much vigor and bitterness the second Trump administration has instilled on a global basis in terms of the relationships, retaliation from every continent is going to be massive against these unjust, illogical ass tariffs he's putting on all these countries. Trump is existentially mishandling the placement of tariffs on 195 countries. The monumental upticks in tariff prices will sour, tarnish, or outright sever relationships with countless countries, making even stronger rivals in China, Mexico, Canada, India, to name a few. Taking effect August 7th, 2025, Trump's tariffs are in numerous cases double of what the Hawley-Smoot Act proposed, and the GDP, the gross domestic product, the kind of like the sum of all the goods that were sold and produced by a country in a single year, right? So the GDP today is around 29 times the amount it was in 1930. In 1929, the GDP of the United States is at around $1.19 trillion. The 2025 United States gross domestic product is around $29 trillion. Now, I'm not an economist. I'm not a gynecologist. I'm barely even a guy. But the numbers and the trends support the idea that the catastrophe of these tariffs will be exponentially greater than the losses experienced in the Great Depression. The real GDP dropped around 29% over the course of the Great Depression. So let's say the 20% drop of a $1 trillion GDP in 1930 amounts to a loss of roughly $200 billion. If the $29 trillion GDP of the USA in 2025 drops 20%, the sheer loss will amount to $5.8 trillion. Trillion. The effects of which will shatter industries, collapse job markets, and just so severely worsen the poverty of a country in which around 2/3 of its people are already living paycheck to paycheck. Meanwhile, Hoover's bureaucratic, eugenics-based social elitism, alongside the entire legacy of the United States presidency, has advocated against any and all kinds of socialist measures such as unemployment benefits, job training, Social Security, or anything that could benefit the working class. Compare Hoover's prejudice and hatred towards the working class, as he feared a welfare state would dilute and weaken the gene pool, to the $1.4 trillion cut from Social Security, student loan reforms, Medicaid, etc., that was passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The societal constraints of income inequality and capitalist exploitation are astronomically more dire than they were in Hoover's time. We are fucked. There is not one country listed that's going to be hit with a tariff less than 10%. Practically every country will have to pay a 10% at least increase in order to move goods and services to the United States, as well as in receiving goods and services from the United States. And if you look at this graph, you see that Mexico, China, and Canada are three biggest trading partners that account for and you can see from this table that our three biggest trading partners who make up altogether over a 40% share of US imports in Mexico, China, and Canada are being hit with rates either equivalent to the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act or higher in the 30 and 35% given to China and Canada.
Oh! Bro, what is he doing? What is he doing? That's what is he?
And with retaliation being a guarantee and the trade wars and diplomacy going awry, I would place money that these things are going to at least gain 10 more percent over the course of the second Trump administration. And I feel like that's a conservative estimate. Not to mention the United States is the world's second largest trading nation with over $7 trillion in exports and imports of goods and services in 2022. America is the second largest goods exporter in the world at 2.1 trillion. And in 2022, Canada made up 17% of that, valued over $355 billion, followed by Mexico at $324.3 billion, China at $150 billion, and the European Union 27 at $350 billion. America is also the largest importer of goods in the world at $3.2 trillion in 2022. And guess who the top suppliers were? China at 16.5%, estimated at $536 billion. Then Mexico at $445 billion. Then Canada at $436. Japan at $148 billion. Germany, $147 billion. The European Union at a massive $553.3 billion in value imported that are now going to be taxed super heavily in retaliation. And with those taxes, the supply or the amount purchased is going to dwindle down severely. And guess what? America is also the largest exporter of services in the world at $926 billion. And the largest services importer as well at $680 billion. This is over $1 trillion. This is over $1 trillion. Who's going to cut deals with us now? No. Like how the globe reacted to the Hawley-Smoot Act in forming trade blocs, excluding America, and placing retaliatory tariffs on America because of how high America raised their tariff rate. It's all the tariffs are going to do, all that tariffs do in general, is destroy trade relationships, cost countries hundreds of billions in lost revenue from retaliation and lower exchange. They destroy entire industries like agriculture, automotive, and the financial sector, on top of countless others. It increases unemployment and poverty drastically in the countries affected and implementing the tariffs based on all of that retaliation that comes from that. And then it makes survival even more impossible for the working class because jobs are going to leave, money's going to dry up, businesses are going to close, and any reporting on the money being made from these tariffs, it's not going to the infrastructure of the country. It's not going to the working people who are two-thirds of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. It's just going to fatten the pockets of the ultra-wealthy who are in the positions to benefit from these contracts, because they've drawn it up for themselves to benefit from it. We're fucked, bro. We are cooked.